here. I'm Emerson, by the way. So, here we are. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Elizabeth Jennings. I feel very grateful to know her and be part of the incoming PCC cohort together. I feel Elizabeth really brings a lot to our group. First of all, she has a great bravery in her life story. If you're lucky enough to hear parts of it, she's really made some clear leaps towards knowing and towards really opening up her self-knowledge and blossoming as a person. And I think with her background she got a bachelor's in English,
writing, yeah.
in writing, and then then a graduate in English, and her work education and her work with the Peace Corps and a radical opening of self-discovery. She brings with her a very sincere and openly heartfelt need and desire to really reconcile herself with the world and contribute her creative ideas and intellectual prowess for the community. So without further ado, please welcome Elizabeth Jennings.
Thank you. Thank you. This isn't working, I don't think. Is it working? Okay. Testing? Yeah. Testing. Okay.
It's kicking in.
Yeah, it's not working. Oh well, I'll just talk. I'll just talk louder and louder and louder as I go along.
Wait. Relax. I'm sorry. Maybe you zip it up. No. I messed it up before. All right. Well, let's see. Yeah. That was the problem. The reverb. All right. Yeah. All right. I have to leave it there. Here, I guess this is the only thing I can do actually is just raise the mic a little bit. Sorry. I will have to go back over there and make it just right. That should help.
Okay. I didn't know that Emerson was going to be speaking about like self-creation and self-knowledge and going beyond the self, but it's perfect because it segues right into what I'm talking about. The title of my talk is Journal to and Beyond the Self. And the reason I chose that title is because earlier this year I took a certification program to teach a class called Journal to the Self. But I know all of us here are interested in more than self-improvement. We're interested in taking our self-knowledge and using it to create new philosophical systems as well as new social systems. And so I wanted to speak about the connect between such a personal, private practice such as journal writing and how that turns into action in the world and my experience with that and in sort of phases. And I wanted to begin by reading an excerpt from James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And it is a little lengthy, but I think it really sets up what journal writing as a process has been for me in my life and what I think it can be for anyone that really dedicates herself or himself to that delving into self-knowledge. He says, while his mind had been pursuing its intangible phantoms, he had heard about him the constant voices of his father and his masters, urging him to be a gentleman above all things, and urging him to be a good Catholic above all things. These voices had now come to be hollow-sounding in his ears. When the gymnasium had been opened, he had heard another voice, urging him to be strong and manly and healthy, and when the movement towards national revival had begun, he had heard yet another voice, bidding him to be true to his country and help to raise up her language and tradition. In the profane world, as he foresaw, a worldly voice would bid him raise up his father's fallen estate by his labors. And meanwhile, the voice of his school comrades urged him to be a decent fellow, to shield others from blame, or to beg them off and to do his best to get free days for the school. And it was in the din of all these hollow-sounding voices that made him halt irresolutely in the pursuit of phantoms. I will tell you what I will do and what I will not do. I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it call itself my home, my fatherland, or my church, and I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can. Welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience, and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. And every time I pick up my notebook and my pen, I feel like I'm encountering for the millionth time that reality of experience and going into my soul and forging that uncreated conscience of my race. And I know that's why all of us are here, that's why all of us are in the PCC program, is so that we can take our self-knowledge and use it to create that uncreated conscience of a better future that we all hope is possible. So today the kind of writing I'm talking about is not writing as art, not anything literary, but writing really as a spiritual practice of finding out who you are and taking that product is not a literary product, but as a product of a changed state of being into the world. As memoirist Elizabeth Andrews says in her book, Writing the Sacred Journey, I've written myself out of the closet, I've written myself out of depression, out of regular employment, and into work that fosters a similar passion for writing in others. So I've done the first three, and today I'm starting to do the last one. So thank you all for coming here and helping me to fulfill my dream of sharing my passion for writing with other people. And I don't think writing is the only path, and I don't think it's enough. That's become very clear to me that I need physical practices and meditative practices, and need community and nature. But I do think for many people, especially those of us that are more introverted, writing can be a very powerful foundation for agency in the world. So I've sort of labeled 4 phases that I feel that I myself have gone through as a journal writer in this cyclical pattern, and that I think you might recognize as I talk about them. So that's how I'm going to present my insights here. And we begin with, what does journaling to the self mean? It means clarifying an identity, like Emerson was talking about, that self-knowledge, forming identity and transforming an identity. So the first phase that I find myself in sometimes is that I don't know what story I'm living. And the question is, what story am I living? Who am I? And one of the tools in the toolbox is what Kathleen Adams calls these writing tools. I took a class with her, and they're like tools for self-knowledge and self-transformation. One of them is called a character sketch called Who Lives in Your House? And the assignment was that we had to go home and look around us and write a description of our environment, and just based on what we saw, what kind of person we thought might live in that space. And it's very enlightening, just looking at the adjectives that you use to describe the things around you and the person that might live there. You'll figure out really quickly what story you're living. And so I recommend that. At the time that I first did this exercise, I was in Ukraine, living in the second floor of a Soviet apartment, and I got a lot of insight into how I felt about my life at that point and where I wanted to go in my life, just with that little exercise. And I realized a couple of years ago that I really needed to focus more on myself, my writing as an act of self-transformation rather than something literary. I wasn't really ready for that yet. Anton Chekhov said, if you want to work on your art, work on your life. And I had to learn that the hard way, because 3 years ago I got the idea to write a spiritual memoir about my journey through fundamentalism and out of it into this more expansive spiritual view. And I got really excited. I was like, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to publish it, and it's going to inspire people. And I went out and I bought this book called Writing to Change the World. And I started looking at publishing houses, and I hadn't written a book yet. And a year later, I did have a draft, but I just looked at it and I was like, I don't know who even wrote that. I don't know who's writing this book. And that was like a big crucible moment for me to say, okay, before I can really give something of my art to the world, I have to first forge an identity. And that's when I decided I was going to bicycle across the United States, which was a really identity. That'll force you to confront yourself, unlike a lot of other things. Okay. So writing is my way of like confronting and then coping with and then transforming the truth. And it doesn't leave you stuck at one stage. That's what I love about journal writing. If you keep at it, it'll keep taking you forward. And I know a lot of us are in radical mythospeculation with Brian and Rick, and he talks about the principle of differentiation. The cosmos wants to become something more specific and more diverse. And for me, writing really is that ability to become a specific self so that you can make a specific impact on the world. And it forces you to pay attention to what's around you, like in that exercise, who lives in your house. So that first question is, what story am I living? And if you get a little clearer about then you can start thinking, well, what story do I want to live? And that's where we confront the phantoms that I was reading about earlier in the Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. These phantoms are these demanded identities that other people have asked of us. And those phantoms provide external security, but at the price of our inner power. And reclaiming our inner power is asking, well, who am I really and what story do I want to live into? Because every place has a cookie cutter that they try to pound you into. And I know all of us here want to create better cultural stories, like these expansive philosophical ideas. But I think we really need to start with asking ourselves, well, what stories are we telling about little old me? And like, what stories am I living day to day? And do I tell people stories about myself that make them feel sorry for me or make them admire me? Do I tell them myself stories that make me feel powerless or powerful? And just having that self-awareness, I think, is necessary before we can have this cosmic awareness that all of us are so excited about. But if you go for that first, you'll kind of fall on your face and be like, wait a minute, I don't have the life that I need in order to reach that spiritual place, or that place of influence in society. So the way I do the phantoms exercise is I really like lists. Some people are more artsy and they like to make doodles and free writing and all that. But I like to make I made a list of my phantoms and then the identities that I needed to take on in order to defy my phantoms. And it was really revelatory. I did this one in June. I'm just going to read a couple of the phantoms and to defy my phantoms. One of my phantoms was my mother's miracle. And to defy my phantoms, I decided I needed to become a person with the right to fail and learn. Another one of my phantoms was a chipper cog in the machine. And to defy that one, I needed to be a follower of my felt callings. So just becoming very clear about what it is that you've been living and what it is that you need to be living is... How many of you have heard of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron? Cool, that's encouraging. Yeah, I did that earlier this year, and when I first saw it, I was like, oh, I'm not creatively blocked, haha. Yeah, it was really transformative. I'm going to keep doing it every year. But it's a program for overcoming blocked creativity. And she says, as we lose our vagueness about ourself, our values, our life situation, we become available to the moment. It is there in the particular that we contact the creative self. Remember when I was 20 years old, I named my journal Iceberg because it had brought me to the realization that this tiny percentage of my life was on the surface and that most of my life was interior and that something had to change about that and I had to get the interior out. I had to change my life so that I could safely get the interior out. And writing reveals to us the narratives below the surface of the life that we're living just to get by in the world. And that's what's made it such an exciting, transformative experience for me. So after you've asked yourself, what story am I living? What story do I want to live? Here we can get our way to the beyond the self, the meta-narrative. What story do I want to contribute to? And I know we're all aware that an overarching meta-narrative is largely missing and that we kind of feel jostled between different viewpoints. And yet, we have these serious decisions that are required of us in this time. And I know, for me specifically, I sometimes feel overwhelmed, like how can I ever know that I'm making the right decision? I can't accumulate enough information or enough wisdom fast enough to truly be my best self in this moment. But if we just come to a place of stillness and recognize that just below the surface, there's this intuition, this inner wisdom. You can think of it as a higher power if that helps you, or the higher self. And Kathleen Adams calls this one the inner wisdom dialogue, this exercise. You just come to a place of stillness and you write down a question and you just sit with it for a while. A question like, what is the direction of this in my life? Or what is the next step to take with this? Or what do I need to know or understand about? How can I best, what is the meaning of? And just sit with that question and don't impose a rational answer on it right away. And that's very difficult, at least for me. just to sit there with that question. But if you sit there with it long enough, something will come up or down or from somewhere that you did not foresee as an answer. And it can be very uncomfortable, but it'll be enlightening, and you might chafe against it, but it'll take you forward into a new possibility of a narrative that you can not only live, but create. Not only something that you've lived before, but something new in your life. So I highly recommend the inner wisdom exercise if you come to a really difficult decision and don't feel that you have the information that you need to address it. And that's how I came this past summer to an understanding for the first time of paradox and non-duality. It always just gone over my head. But I sat down with my notebook and I asked, well, what does this mean? And I got an answer. And it's that kind of magical power that you can have just by sitting there with a pen and being patient. So you ask yourself, what story am I living? What story do I want to live? What story do I want to contribute to? And then we get to the sticky part, what is stopping me? That is always an exciting question, because as soon as we come to that specific sense of self and that vision that we know we want to share with the world and that we can share with the world, that's when the denial and the fear and these obnoxious people that pop up out of nowhere come. Or more likely they were always there and you just didn't ever realize that they were interfering with who you were supposed to be in the world. And suddenly life can feel really hard. You're like, well, what is this? I thought it was going to be easier once I got all these insights, you know? But that's not the way life works, unfortunately. Like, you have to break through those blocks in order to get awakened to your purpose in the world. So the main practice of the artist's way is the morning pages. You get up, you have your coffee or breakfast or whatever, you write 3 pages longhand, whatever pops into your head before you leave the house. And when I first heard of that, I was like, well, what's the point? Like, I'm just writing something that nobody's ever going to read, that I'm never going to edit. Like, I don't get it. And but as I started doing that, I started realizing the value, because you can get up every morning and think, oh my God, I hate my job, and go to work. Next day, I hate my job and go to work. Some people do that for decades. But if you have to get up early and write 3 pages and you're like, oh my gosh, I hate my job because of my boss, I hate my job because of my coworkers. Like, you can only do that for so many days before you annoy yourself into taking action and doing something about it. And that's where I really came to, was this point of grading against these things that I had allowed myself to live with for so long, and being like, okay, I can't deal with this anymore, I'm going to do something about it. And so the morning pages, I highly recommend that as a practice of overcoming blocks. Another one is the perspectives exercise. This is a journal to the self tool, where you pick a date in the future, like a year or 3 months, or further or sooner, and you write a journal entry as if looking back at everything that brought you to that point from now to then. And I wrote one in July that was dated 3 months later, putting me here at this retreat in Esalen. And I didn't know if I was going to get into CIS. I didn't know if I was going to get, loans or a job or housing. Existentially and relationally, I was in complete crisis. I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to get there, but I'm just going to write this as an act of hope. And I wrote it, and right before I came here to Esalen, I read back over it, and I was like, all of that happened. It was like writing a prophecy. And I did the same thing to get myself to Hawaii earlier this year, and it's really fun to read back over those and see that things really are possible if you imagine it, and then you're willing to take, not only imagine it, but willing to take the steps necessary to get you there. And speaking of writing as an act of hope, I want to delve into that a little more. Flannery O'Connor is an American writer. That's one of my favorites. She writes really kind of grotesque short stories, is what she's most famous for. And someone once told her, like, your novels are so hopeless. And she just looked at him and she said, people without hope do not write novels. And like, that really stuck with me, that idea that writing is an act of hope, because it's true. Like, you would not sit down and write something if you were in the depths of depression. Like, you can write your way out of depression, but the act of writing is that act of hope that there is a way out of this. I can think my way through this. I can feel my way through this. I can write my way through this. And that's what writing has been for me in my life, is an act of hope. So you ask yourself, what story am I living? What story do I want to live? What story do I want to contribute to? And what's stopping me? And if you know all of that, like, you're unstoppable. I'm going to tell you right now, you're unstoppable. Because most people don't know any of that. And you will come to points in your life where you don't know any of that again. And you just work through the cycle again. And it's a never-ending, really exciting adventure of coming to find who you are and your purpose in the world. So writing not only helps you confront your truth, but then change your truth. Because it's very difficult to write for any length of time and not be changed. And what does that effect does that interchange have? Well, we're all aware that the microphase and the macrophase and the subjective and the objective are so much more intertwined than mechanistic science would have us to believe. And memoirist Elizabeth Andrews says, even an unpublished memoir exerts influence on the world. But notice she didn't say an unwritten one. Because it's that process of writing and of delving through the memories that is transformative. So how do you get started doing some of this in your life? Well, writer Gene Fowler says, writing is easy. All you do is sit staring at a blank sheet of paper until drops of blood form on your forehead. I know as graduate students, we're all familiar with that sensation. Because fashioning a self and revealing a self are the two probably most difficult human activities that there are. And so just watching someone sit with a pen and paper might look kind of boring, but there's a lot going on there under that surface. And it's a really respectable activity to take time to find out who you are and to share who you are. So I hope you try some of these exercises, like the Who Lives in Your House or the Inner Wisdom Dialogue, listing your phantoms. But more than anything, I just hope you go out and you defy the cultural myth of the mad artist, and you write for your sanity. And you write for the sanity of the world, because the world needs more people that are willing to have the courage to delve in and find out who they are and to share that specific truth with the world. So I'm in the thick of both processes, and I really thank you for coming and listening, and I hope you are also in that own process yourself. I'm sure you are, that's why you're here. And if you're interested in Journal to the Self, I became certified earlier this year, but I haven't actually taught a class yet, and I would like to next semester, or a workshop or something. So if you would like to meet as a group and learn some more journal writing techniques, I have a sign-up sheet. If you leave your name and email, and I'll be in touch with you. I look forward to continuing on this journey with all of you. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Yes.
Wow. Man, you need a platform. I mean, you're sitting in class and you get up there. Boom.
Whoa. Man, there's so much in there underneath.
Thank you.
Man, you're born to be up there.
Yeah.
Woo!
Woo! Oh, thank you. Yes.
Speak a little. I like the fact that you brought up conscience and this.
Yes.
Intent to, I mean that.
Forgot.
It's a tricky one because conscience is kind of not moral.
Okay.
My feeling is not a moral thing.
Okay. So how do you define conscience?
Yeah. Good values.
Uh-huh.
Like.
Well, that sounds moral. No,
It's just not a set rule, like a moral law is like killing bad.
Yeah.
That's fate.
I guess.
Value will be preserving life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely very interested in ethics, and I have reached very few conclusions regarding ethics at this point in my life. But I think what I mean by writing as a process of uncovering conscience is what is right for me to do at this moment. like in this situation or with this knowledge that I have. And just the acceptance that maybe what everybody's telling me I should be doing is not what I should really be doing, and I need to like get alone with myself in that mental space of solitude and creativity and inner wisdom to find out if that's really the right thing for me to do. So I think that's what I meant by forging a personal conscience. Yes?
I can relate to that as well. Whenever I'm writing, it's just kind of my truth just kind of comes out, and I don't even know where it's coming from. And I think that's kind of that conscience, you know, that moral truth.
Cool. Thank you.
A couple things. One is, I was trying to imagine what you were like before you started writing. I mean, you're such a you could be such a walking embodiment of your truth. Now you're this deep person.
Thank you.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I've been writing since I was about 8 years old, so there was
I bet you at 7 you weren't that impressive. The other thing I wanted to say, it was so cool the way you, I mean, there's so many things, but at the end there, write for your sanity, write for the sanity of the world, and this, which is exactly what Emerson was saying in terms of the self-knowledge is the squishy part. And so that I just thought that was just fabulous, the way, the idea itself, but also how it melded with what Emerson was saying.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.